G'day, Aston Martin has got off to one of the worst starts imaginable. What happened and how will it affect their 2026 F1 season? Reliability problems, limited testing mileage, a fresh engine partnership with Honda and organisational pressures combined to make the start of Aston Martin's 2026 F1 campaign a nightmare. In a normal year, F1 teams would test for 3 days in Bahrain prior to starting the season. But this year is a turning point for the sport with new power unit regulations, revised aerodynamic philosophies, and a greater reliance on electric power. That's why a Barcelona closed test and 2 3-day open tests in Bahrain were scheduled. Unfortunately for Aston Martin, their problems began before the Bahrain tests even started. The team's new AMR 26 car wasn't ready in time for the full Barcelona shakedown. They ended up clocking just 65 laps over their allowed 3 days. Mercedes, by contrast, logged 501. Straight up, Fernando and Lance's limited track time meant the team had less time to troubleshoot early issues, putting Aston Martin well behind the 8 ball. They had fewer baseline simulations and fewer reliability checks completed than all of their rivals. But still, they had 6 full days of testing in Bahrain. Surely they could catch up. Well, in a stable regulatory cycle, losing a day or two of testing might be manageable. Under the new rules, though, that deficit was always going to be more damaging. There's a lack of early data, which normally leads to more guesswork in the development path. Barcelona should have been where Aston Martin discovered weaknesses in cooling, aerodynamics, or on the electrical integration. Instead, those issues surfaced in Bahrain, and boy, did they wreak havoc. The team suffered repeated technical problems, including power unit and battery failures that interrupted long-run simulations and race distance practice. One day of testing ended in Fernando Alonso becoming stationary on track, and on the final day, Lance Stroll completed just 2 laps before lunch and 4 afterwards. And then the team abandoned its program entirely. By the final day, the mood in the team was tense. Team owner Lawrence Stroll was doing his best to present a united front, but his body language said something different. By the end of Bahrain testing, Aston Martin had clocked just 128 laps. Mercedes, 432. And when you add the laps covered in both test locations, it's plain to see just how far behind Aston Martin was to the testing lap leaders. Now, mileage matters enormously in modern Formula 1. Aston's engineers have limited performance data and little opportunity to understand tyre wear, energy deployment strategies, or aerodynamic efficiency. Every test lap contributes to simulation correlation, software calibration, and reliability modelling. Teams that gather data from hundreds of kilometres can refine setups and eliminate weaknesses well before the start of the season. Aston Martin's deficit means the early races may effectively become extended test sessions with no guarantees of being able to complete a race, perhaps even qualifying for one. It'll certainly cost them points and momentum. A big contributor to the drama has been its new partnership with Honda. While Honda's historically produced championship-winning engines, integrating a new power unit during a regulation overhaul is always risky. Midway through the last morning of testing, the Japanese manufacturer issued a press release confirming a battery-related issue had impacted their test plan. A shortage of power unit parts resulted in them having to run very limited and short stints on track. 2 laps in the morning, 4 in the afternoon on Friday. Fernando had already flown out early on Thursday night, and Lance spent the whole of Friday at the track for about 10 minutes on track. When things kicked off on that final day, I spoke to an Aston mechanic who said they'd be okay for running on the Friday. They weren't. Early on, they were doing stationary pit stop practice in pit lane. Now, you don't fly to Bahrain to do pit stop practice. A little later on, I spotted Lance sitting in his car and then directing his team to an issue in the cockpit. And then at some point, the crew was stationed in front of the car, effectively running interference to stop photographers and cameramen from shooting the goings-on in that garage. The team frustration was all too clear. Of course, these problems are more than just short-term inconveniences. Power unit reliability directly influences development cycles. If engineers have to focus on preventing failures, they can't optimise performance. The transition to Honda also represents a cultural shift. Aston Martin had become accustomed to Mercedes power units, known for consistency and data integration. Switching suppliers requires adapting to new software, new packaging constraints, and new energy deployment philosophies. Such transitions often take a season or 2 to stabilise. Performance in F1 is cumulative. That is, each upgrade builds on previous knowledge. Aston's limited testing will almost certainly result in its development curve starting flatter than their 10 rivals. This creates a dangerous spiral. Round 1 in Melbourne looks like being a shocker for the team. If it is, will it force the team to introduce rapid upgrades and rush development? Possibly. If it does, likelihood of misjudging solutions is high. If engineers have to spend the opening races validating basic reliability rather than refining performance, their championship hopes could be shot by mid-season. And while Aston Martin struggled in testing, the likes of Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren showed strong pace and reliability. Their time on track paid dividends. In F1, relative performance matters more than absolute improvement. Even if Aston Martin eventually unlocks speed in that new car, they're likely to be battling it out in the midfield rather than competing with the front runners. While it's difficult to tell exactly, most pundits believe the car is about 3 seconds a lap slower than the front runners, and morale amongst the crew, well, that is poor. Some reports suggest that crew at the factory were sleeping just 3 hours a night between shifts. The fact is, drivers rely on confidence in machinery to push limits, and repeated failures undermines that trust. Fernando Alonso says he still has faith in the car's potential, but both drivers needed way more time to adapt to the new regulations and vehicle behaviour. Just working out how to overtake another car took many drivers many laps to get on top of. It's not just about putting your foot down. Do that on a long straight and you're likely to run out of energy. Look, I'm no tech expert, but there is plenty to learn about the new energy side of the Honda power unit, and having so few laps under the belts puts Fernando and Lance at the back of the pack. Certainly Aston Martin entered the 2026 era with enormous expectations. Adrian Newey's appointment and the expansion of the Silverstone factory signalled to everyone that this team was serious. They expected to be a championship contender. That looks highly unlikely this season. Missing test targets and reliability failures have set that team back and caused much damage to the team's and Honda's reputation. Can Aston Martin recover? Formula One history shows that, yes, teams can recover from poor pre-seasons. However, much has to be done before that happens. The situation this year is complicated by 3 factors: a new engine supplier, new technical leadership structure, and the new F1 regulations. The Barcelona and Bahrain test dramas have set the team back big time. And while the team's resources, leadership and long-term vision remain impressive, the evidence from pre-season testing indicates that 2026 may become a year of rebuilding rather than triumph. And what of 44-year-old Aston Martin driver Fernando Alonso? The two-time world champion's relationship with Honda is one of the most famous, tumultuous and now ironic storylines in modern Formula One. It was hostile and very public during their McLaren partnership, but that was many years ago. Let's hope it doesn't go that way again. Aston Martin is likely paying Honda between 18 and 23 million US dollars for their power units. For that money, they expect a reliable and competitive engine. At present, that's far from reality, but it is early days. If they can turn things around, perhaps Aston Martin could be fighting for podiums or maybe even wins by the end of the year. But as it stands now, that looks unlikely. If you've enjoyed this video, could you please hit the like button? And for the 50% of you or so that are unsubscribed, please hit that button. Remember, subscription is free, it doesn't cost you a cent. And for a whole lot of extra F1 content, merchandise and stuff, head over here and have a look. Thanks for watching and stay passionate. Well, in a stable, I'm going to put this behind here. That's a much better idea.